I'm Al Turgeon. I'm 71 years old. Today's date is April 15th, 2015. We're in State College, Pennsylvania. I'm talking with Larry Ragan, a professional colleague and friend for nearly 30 years.
And my name is Larry Ragan. I'm 58 years old. Today's date is 4/15/2015. We're in State College, and I'm talking with Al Turgeon, who is a colleague, a friend, and a hero of mine. So, Al, it's wonderful to be here with you today, and I so much appreciate an opportunity to explore some experiences of your past and learn a little bit about how they've influenced your career, your personal life, your professional life, and maybe your view on life. So I'd like to do this in three parts and perhaps start with exploring sort of that transition from your college experiences and ROTC into what it was like to go into your military service, followed by then the primary point being around that military service, and then afterwards, how did you transition back into stateside military as well as into civilian? So I thought we'd pursue maybe that line of discussion.
Okay.
So the first is to share with us a little bit about your college experience. I know that you were involved in ROTC. How did that work, and then how did you transition into a experience where you were in Vietnam?
Well, I started college in 1961 and enrolled in ROTC. At the time, we had the draft, and so it was assumed I'd have a military obligation, and I chose to serve that, or provide that military service as an officer, as opposed to enlisted capacity. And so continue with that. I was actually quite involved in ROTC, including the flight training program my senior year. I guess I assumed that I would wind up flying a fixed-wing aircraft in Germany. Of course, when I graduated in 1965, Germany had retreated from the landscape, and Vietnam had, within the past year, become a very, very important part of U.S. military activity. And so I thought I'd have some choices, but when I went on active duty, there wasn't any choice. I was given orders to infantry school, helicopter school, and then Vietnam.
Wondering if you could just talk for a moment about coming out of college. What were your expectations about this next step as you were doing that transition? Did you have things in your mind about how you thought it might be?
Actually, it wasn't that abrupt a transition. It was more of a progression, because in ROTC we had summer camp the previous summer. I'd had a fair amount of contact with military people, so I knew what I was getting into. And it was just a matter of getting started and doing it on a full-time rather than a part-time basis. So infantry training was fine. I was well-conditioned for it and knew what it was about. It was at times it was a little bit taxing, but it was fine. I specifically chose infantry because if my helicopter were ever shot down, it'd be nice to know what to do on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is I went down several times, and I spent most of the time on the radios, so I never got to play infantryman.
Which maybe was a good thing in the end. Right. So there was no shock then or surprise when you got your papers for Vietnam. That wasn't
No, not at all. I knew what was coming, and I was psychologically and in other ways prepared for it.
Yeah. So as you began to make that transition then physically now from the States, you've gone through your training, your preparation, now you're on your way to Vietnam. What was that experience like?
You know, I remember the flight. It was exciting. Everybody was enthusiastic, looking forward to this major adventure. And when I got there, the first culture shock came when I got off the airplane, and I saw these buses that were there to transport us, and they had this wire mesh covering the windows. And it didn't take long to figure out the reason for that wire mesh was in case somebody threw a hand grenade, it wouldn't go through the window, it would bounce off. That's when the reality hit me that I was in a war zone.
Yeah, that was a wake-up call.
That's right.
So back to that air flight. You guys are talking, you're playing cards, you might be having a drink or two. Anyone think about the severity of what you were getting into? Like maybe not everyone's going to be on this flight on the way home.
that thought lingered in my mind that maybe not all these people would make it back, and particularly people in especially hazardous occupations. There were some special forces sergeants I saw. They were in an especially hazardous situation, and some other pilots. And so I knew it was going to be an ordeal, but still the novelty of it and the excitement overrode that.
And there's probably not too much they can do in preparing you for what you're about to experience, right? I mean, in your training back in the States and on that flight over, your adrenaline is going, your mind is going. It's all new. It's all exciting at that point.
They tried to prepare you. Some of the instructors in infantry training at Fort Benning, as well as in flight training, would say, when you're in combat, you better do this if you want to survive. And so that issue kept coming up time and time again. And I guess it motivated us to pay particularly close attention to what was going on.
So you came from the States. Now you're in Vietnam. It's hot?
Oppressively hot, yes.
Did that impact you? Did you?
Yeah, it was like stepping into a steam room. It was part of the shock of being in a war zone. It was also a very tropical war zone with high heat and high humidity.
How about culturally, the city or the town?
The first thing I noticed at the Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon was how small the Vietnamese were. They were little tiny people, and that was a shock. Americans towered over them.
You were going to say that you remembered something, I think, about the impact of arriving on the ground there. You saw this small people. You saw buses with things. This was very different than what you had just left in the States.
Yeah, in fact, they transported us to a place called Camp Alpha, and where we had to stay until they arranged for transportation to our respective sites. And so I was assigned a bunk, and that evening we had a mortar attack. And I was there with no weapons, no way to defend myself, entirely dependent upon the people who were there to provide security. So that was a bit of a shock. And it was a relief the next morning when a helicopter arrived to take me to Cu Chi, which was my duty station, about 17 miles away.
Did you think that was going to be worse? Or, I mean, I would have thought you would have been safer back at Camp Alpha.
No, I was safer when I had weapons issued to me and a bunk and colleagues I got to know. Then I figured we could depend upon each other to get ourselves through that.
So about those colleagues, do those bonds form right away? You're all in the same situation. We're going to kind of hang together as a group?
Yes, we developed a strong camaraderie, knowing that we would have to help each other out. And I never realized how much we would be dependent upon each other until later on, but I had a sense of it right at the outset.
And when you say depend upon each other, mentally, physically, everything, this is...
Well, the one thing about helicopter pilots, if you are down for whatever reason, you almost have a traffic control problem because everybody who hears about it proceeds to the site to see if they can help out.
Really?
So within minutes, we had gunships flying around. Somebody came in, dropped off a PRC-25 radio, so I wouldn't have to hang at the helicopter. I could be away from it because a downed helicopter is a magnet for mortar fire, and you wanted to get away from it if you could. And so I had communication with the people flying cover for us. I had other people who were arranging for a Chinook to come in and transport the helicopter out and then to transport us out. So immediately you became aware that you weren't alone. You were there with your colleagues who were looking out for you.
And they're going to get there to help you at their own peril. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And you would do the same thing, and you probably did.
Well, we did it for everybody, but especially for other helicopter crews. But if there was a medevac, no matter what you were doing, you would tend to drop what you were doing, get a vector to the site, do the medevac, get the person or persons to a hospital as quickly as possible, and then resume your other missions. So we were always alerted to, no matter what we were doing, to that possibility, and it happened fairly often.
Wow. So I would imagine now you've got a helicopter, you're assigned to a location, you're now beginning to fly. What kinds of experiences did you have by way of the service? Were you doing mostly evacuations of medically cases, or?
We would do medevacs. Our primary mission was called combat assault. We would carry usually 6 combat-loaded infantrymen in each helicopter. We flew flights of 10 typically, so we'd have 60 troops. We would land in an LZ with gunship cover. They'd be firing up the tree lines as we were approaching the LZ. The outside door gunner would be firing his machine gun until we got on the ground and the troops disembarked. Then they would take over firing, and then we'd try to get out of there as quickly as possible. That was our primary mission. It also tended to be fairly hairy. And then most of our flying was resupplying. We'd transport people and material from one place to another, usually working for a particular unit for that day. And we call that ash and trash. There were some other missions that might be command and control, flying a commander so he could see his troops on the ground, or recon. They were reconning a site in preparation for an operation. And I even flew some of what I call psi warfare. They would actually hook up loudspeakers, and they'd be speaking as we were flying over an area or dropping leaflets. So it's whatever they wanted us to do. That's what we did.
So this first time you're in a helicopter, and now you're going into a combat zone. What was that like? I mean, you've got guns firing all over. That had to be a scary venture. It
was scary and it was exciting, you know. But early on, we never had any mishaps, or didn't have any mishaps, and so there were two pilots in a D model Huey. One would be flying, and the other would have his fingers lightly on the controls, ready to take over in case the other guy got shot. So, I mean, that reality reinforced the notion that we're in a combat situation. But it was mostly exciting. I never really was scared until I had been there about a month, and I landed on a mine. And that was a frightening experience. I'd never known anybody land on a mine. But we were resupplying an LZ right along the Saigon River on the west edge of the Iron Triangle. I had descended to the LZ. There were a couple of other helicopters there and some APCs and people. And I was at hover altitude trying to find a level place on which to set the skids. All of a sudden, there was a loud noise. The lights went out. I remember thinking to myself, I hope I don't die. And when I opened my eyes, I was on my left side. I was flying left seat, so I was at the bottom of the helicopter. I looked up through the plexiglass window, through the roof of the helicopter, and I could see what was left of the rotor blades churning up the earth. I tried to move, and I was pinned. And then I realized I had the seatbelt shoulder harness assembly locking me in, probably saved me from serious injury. And just then a knife came plunging through the window, and that was my crew chief. He was cutting out the window so I could jump out. So the two of us ran. We looked back after we'd taken cover behind an APC, and I could see the helicopter in flames.
So you were seconds away from an explosion or from a serious...
Because we were carrying mortar rounds, so I knew there was going to be things cooking off shortly. So anyway, we got out of there. We were evacuated, went to Kuchi. I had to go to the hospital to get checked out. I had some cuts and bruises on my legs, and the doctor said, do you want a Purple Heart? I said, you got to be kidding me. This isn't very serious. And he said, no, drew blood, gets a Purple Heart. So I said, sure. So I got my first decoration.
Wow.
But that night, I remember lying in bed thinking, my God, I've been here a month. I've landed on a mine, damn near got burnt up in a fire. How am I going to make it through a year of this? And I started praying. I hadn't prayed in a while, but started praying, and every day I'd say a little prayer, please get me through this day. And he did.
Do you think so this is now beginning to affect you not only physically but personally and spiritually as well. You're having sort of a change. Was that a common phenomena for other, like so you're in this bond with these other guys, is this something you talked about or?
No, everybody kind of kept that to himself. But I noticed I had Catholic service on Sundays, and a lot of my fellow pilots were there. So, I mean, they obviously continued to practice their faith, but we didn't really talk about it.
So you had this helicopter crash, and I would guess that when these things happen, lots of times people don't get out of these okay. You were very fortunate. What other kind of experiences did you have that were, you're in this great big ship and gunfire and all?
Yeah. Most of the things that happened over a short period of time. We'd take some hits on a helicopter, or like one time we had a crew member got hit with a round, but he survived it. So you knew that you were in a dangerous situation, or you could see another helicopter shot down, and then you tried to help out if you could. But I did have 2 engine failures, and managed to survive those experiences. But
now, an engine failure, are you talking about the engines of this helicopter stop? What do you do? What's that like?
Well, it's interesting. In training, they're always chopping the power, so you get used to responding to an engine failure. But when it happened the first time, I'd been in country about 4 months, and there was a loud noise, and all of a sudden we started dropping like a rock. And initially, I didn't know what it was. And then it suddenly occurred to me, the engine quit. So I bottomed the collective. We entered what we call autorotative descent.
Are your blades still moving at this point? Blades are still going.
When you drop the collective, you minimize the angle of attack of the main rotor blades, and the flow of air maintains RPM. Oh. And that's what saves you at the end. You can do a flare, pull pitch, and that's how you land softly. And which is what we did. And you practice it so much that it becomes second nature. So we landed softly. And
do you have your choice of landing at that point?
Well, you have to have a place to land.
Yeah.
That's why I always exercise caution. I like to be over a good forced landing area. Mm-hmm. I hated overflying jungle because if the engine quit, you'd land to the treetops and then you'd fall the rest of the way. Mm-hmm. So if I was flying over a jungled area and there was a highway, I always try to overfly the highway. Mm. We call that flying IFR. I follow roads. So instead of taking an angle, you'd follow this road and then you'd turn and follow another road
for the safety of a landing spot. Should you need
have a place to land, and so somebody could find you. Mm. You could say, in fact, my second engine failure, I was overflying Highway 13. And I noticed on the map the village of Chanthon. So when I was calling with my Mayday call, I could tell them I was overflying Highway 13 at 1 click north of Chanthon. But the first engine failure was interesting. I just happened to be carrying 8 infantrymen in the back, not combat loaded, just carrying their rifles. And they were hitching a ride to Kuchi. And when the engine quit, I had one guy sitting right behind my seat. Well, I mentioned earlier the seatbelt shoulder harness assembly. Well, the 2 straps that are part of the shoulder harness come together behind your neck, and they go through a hole in the seat, and they're visible on the back side of the seat. And you can have a plastic cover, but we removed all those. Didn't want anything coming loose going into the rotor blades. So the kid sitting behind my seat was holding onto my strap for dear life, and he had me pinned to my seat.
Oh, my word.
I could hardly breathe. And all I could think of on the way down was, wait till I get my hands on that son of a bitch. I'm gonna kill him.
Oh, but he thought that was a safety strap. He's holding on for dear life. Oh, my. So, how about the second one? How was the...
second one was also interesting. We were flying what we call VFR on top. That is, I had perfect visibility, but there was a cloud cover underneath us, so I couldn't see the ground. Mm. But I happened to be flying a helicopter that was equipped with a Decanavigator. And that's a device on top of the instrument panel that has a rotating map and a needle that shows your position on the ground. Mm. And we happened to be flying over jungle terrain, but there was Highway 13. Oh. And so I was using the Decanavigator to maintain my position along Highway 13. Wow. The engine quit. I entered the clouds. We were flying about 3,000 feet. I entered the clouds at 2,500 feet. I was auto-rotating on instruments, hoping that Highway 13 was where
it's actually underneath you, yeah.
I emerged at 700 feet, and Highway 13 was just off to my left. I had just enough room to get the helicopter over Highway 13, do my flare, pull pitch, and land.
Wow. Had you been too much further off, you would have been landing in the jungle.
We probably all died.
Oh, my word.
And if I had one of the ships that didn't have a Decanavigator, right, I wouldn't have known where I was. Wow. So, again, God was with me that day.
Yeah. You share a story about the number of people you can carry in one of your helicopters in a time where you were overloaded.
Yeah, that was probably the most important experience I had. It was May 8th of 1967, and I thought I was done flying for the day. I was heading for the chow hall, and my platoon commander said, "I have a mission for you now." And I wound up leading a flight of 6 helicopters into an LZ near the Iron Triangle to evacuate 72 infantry. We could carry 6 fully combat-loaded troops comfortably. And with 6 helicopters, therefore, we could carry 36. So we had to make 2 flights to get these guys out of there. They were in an LZ, and they were surrounded by a VC force, supposedly on the northeast and west sides. So we were advised to go in from the south, land, pick them up, turn around, and then come out the same way. So I went in as lead, and I would come out as trail. We dropped them off at a secure LZ a few miles away. We had to go back and get the rest of them. And it was late in the day, so we had to boogie because it was going to turn dark. And in the jungle at night, when it's dark, you can't see anything, including the trees you have to get over. So we proceeded in the first time and established communication with the guy on the ground. He threw smoke so we could verify the proper LZ and where he was. So we descended down, and about halfway down, we're maybe around 950 feet, all of a sudden there's machine gun fire coming at us, tracers coming at us from both sides of the LZ, forming a crossfire right in front of our path of descent. And it looked like we were going to fly right through this crossfire. I figured my luck has run out. I'm about to meet my end here. And all I could think of was Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I can fear no evil. So just as we got to the point where we should have intersected with that crossfire, it lowered, and we flew right over it. And I remember thinking, what the hell just happened? I don't understand this. So we landed, turned around, loaded 6 troops. The new lead says, "Trail, are you up?" I said, "This is trail, we're up." We take off. As we're coming out, one ship, the aircraft commander says, "I just got my hydraulics shot out. I'm heading to Cu Chi to make an emergency landing." Before the second guy could report, I could see fuel coming out of a hole in his fuel cell. He reported, went hoping to had enough gas to get to Cu Chi. So the 2 of them split off, and the 4 of us proceeded to the secure LZ to drop these guys off. So I told the guy, this captain flying at 2,000 feet, I said, "I'm down to 4 helicopters, and we only have time for, I think, 1 more evacuation. If you can drop off your passenger," he was flying the battalion commander, I think, "and join us, we can each take an extra man to get this done." So he says, "Fine, you lead him back, and I'll join you as trail." So we head back for the second time. Again, there's this crossfire. Again, it lowers just before we intersect it. We land, turn around, troops get on board. He takes off. He doesn't say, "Trail, are you up?" He was scared. Right. He just wanted to get out of there. I go pull collective, and all he did was bleed off RPM. I look back, I had 8 fully combat-loaded troops.
My.
The other guys had 7. I wound up with the extra guy.
Yeah.
So I thought, I can't kick anybody off. We can't stay there. We're going to be overrun here in a matter of seconds. So I thought, got to lose some weight. So I called back on the mic to the crew chief and the gunner in the back. I said, "Get rid of all unnecessary material, web gear, ammo, sea rations, tools, whatever. Get it out of here now." I looked back, and I could see stuff flying out of both sides of the helicopter. I'd never seen an order carried out with such efficiency.
Wow. So what amazes me is, we think about flying in airplanes, and they've got lots of leeway on the poundage. You're talking about the difference of a couple hundred pounds making the difference whether you get out of that zone or not.
With the D molecule, we were on the margin all the time. How much could you do? If you could get it light on the skids, you could eventually fly it, but it was tricky. Wow. You had to be very smooth. Wow. So after we got rid of a bunch of stuff, I nudged the cyclic forward, pulled pitch, and I could get it moving on the ground. And we're scraping along, gradually picking up speed. I finally hit at 15 knots. I hit translational lift, which is an additional lift due to the transverse flow of air through the rotor blades. And that popped us up to a hover. And that's when you've got, I knew from early experience, you've got to be really careful. Because you get too aggressive, you go right back on the ground. So I just held everything, and we're gradually picking up speed at hover altitude. And the crew chief gets on the mic. He's crying. He says, "Sir, please, let's get out of here." Oh. So I just held everything steady. We started to climb. As we're coming out, people are firing their weapons. We got all 8 M16s firing, the 2 machine guns firing, people firing us, but as far as I knew, we weren't taking any hits. As we were approaching the first line of trees, I could see we weren't going to quite make it. And I thought about doing a rapid turn, but I thought being heavily loaded, I might lose control. So instead, I came back on the cyclic a bit to give me a little more of an angle of ascent. And it worked. As I hit the first line of trees, the tops of the trees smacked the underbelly of the helicopter, but not enough to disrupt lift. So I continued to climb. I could see the second line of trees that marked the top of the jungle canopy, and we just barely cleared those. And as we cleared those and reached the top of the jungle canopy, the lights went out. Wow. The sun had gone entirely beyond the horizon, and it was pitch black.
Oh, my word.
Had that happened just seconds earlier, I couldn't have seen the trees that I had to get.
You needed that silhouette.
Absolutely.
To know how to clear those trees.
That's right.
Wow.
So anyway, we got there, gradually accelerated, did a cyclic climb, dropped the guys off, and went back to Kuchi.
Wow.
And so, I mean, it's abundantly clear that God was with me that night. I wouldn't have survived without it.
So, as you're thinking about this now, you have years and years of reflection. But at that time, did the impact of what had happened, the gunfire dropping, so that you were able to make that landing, how did you process all of that?
It took a while. I mean, I knew I had help, but I hadn't really put it all into perspective. In fact, it took some years before I did that. I remember I was giving a talk one time to a bunch of students enrolled in a history course at Penn State. I'd been invited in to talk about this, and one kid came up afterwards and says, "You must have a very strong faith after that experience." And that helped to put it into perspective. But it took a while to thoroughly process it. But I knew that I didn't just survive Vietnam out of luck. I survived because I was permitted to survive.
So that leads me into your transition then. So you've had these experiences. You come back stateside. A desire to be a professional helicopter flyer? Or
No, I had enough of flying. I mean, flying is sometimes characterized as many hours of boredom punctuated by moments of stark terror. Combat flying is a little bit less boring and somewhat more terrifying. But I knew that in regular flying, so much of it is just holding heading airspeed and altitude. And I didn't want to spend my life doing that. I wanted a different path. I had gone to college to learn to become a golf course superintendent, studied turf grass management, and wasn't sure I wanted to do that anymore. But I reported to my last duty station at Fort Walters, where I had been for primary helicopter training. The duty officer told me I was slated to be a flight instructor, and I told him, I said, "Sir, I really don't want to fly anymore. I've had enough. I mean, I did my duty. I didn't quit. But if there's any possibility, I would prefer a non-flying job." And he was a nice guy. He said, I was still a first lieutenant. I hadn't been promoted to captain yet. And he said, "Lieutenant," he says, "if you want to wait around, we'll see what comes up." So it wasn't 3-4 minutes later.
He meant literally, if you want to wait around.
Yeah, literally. A few minutes later, this light colonel comes in and says, "I need a meteorology instructor." And the guy looks and points his finger, and I come up. He says, "You know anything about meteorology?" And I said, "Well, I had a course in it in college and been through the training." And he says, "You had a lot of teaching experience, right?" And I said, "Oh, yeah. I taught people how to mow on golf courses, mow greens and fairways and things, and a few other things. But, yeah, I had some teaching experience." And he says, "Go ahead." So the two of us walked off. They put me through a month's training on how to teach.
Wow.
Then I had to sit in the class for several weeks, learn the material, started teaching, and discovered that I loved teaching.
Wow.
And I was good at it.
Wow.
And just then I got a letter from my old advisor at Rutgers telling me about an assistantship at Michigan State, encouraged me to look into it. I had visited him when I got home from Vietnam, and so I did, and I started a dialogue with the guy there and wound up taking a calculus course that summer because I'd never had calc. Wound up applying for and getting out 6 weeks early so I could start at the fall term. And exactly 3 years later, I ran through a graduate program, and 3 years later, I walked out of there with a master's and doctorate.
Wow. Went
to the University of Illinois as an assistant professor in 1971 and did that for 40 years.
Wow.
There in Texas A&M and eventually Penn State.
Wow. So I'm wondering what life lessons you took from your experience in Vietnam. How did that influence your perspective? And you've talked a little of your spirituality. How about family and work life? What was the impact?
You learn in combat that life is a precious and very fragile thing. And so you learn to respect life. You learn that life isn't just to be lived, it's to be savored. And it's something you should do with an eye on doing things of significance, of being productive in your life. And so that was a powerful motivator to work hard and try to achieve something significant. So probably what motivated me to pursue graduate work and then as an academic to pursue an academic career and try to have an impact as an educator and as a scholar. And I was married when I went to Vietnam. I learned to cherish my wife and my family and to fulfill my obligation and to make the most of family life, despite the fact that I put in very long hours pursuing my career. And the other thing is you learn that there is a loving God and that you need to serve Him as well as you can.
Well, I just want to thank you for taking the time and sharing of your story and of your heart. I've told you many times, and I'll tell you again, what an inspiration you've been to me. You've been an instructor, a faculty member, a researcher, but always at your heart, I knew you had student interest and teaching as a passion, and you've passed that on. I've learned a lot from you. I thank you for your service to our military, and thank you for your wonderful stories and sharing your life with us.
Thank you, Larry. It's been a privilege, and I've enjoyed working with you all these years.
Thank you.